In February 2022, the world again saw what President Truman called the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression.
Deal with Russia. We never told them that we wouldn't expand. We never put that in writing. We're a defensive organization that is totally peaceful, and we have every right to expand. Documents from the year 1990 from then U.S. Secretary of State James Baker put it in writing, sending a letter to Gorbachev in Russia saying, quote, NATO won't expand even 1 inch to the east. And you have our assurances of that.
Putin's war is not the result of NATO enlargement. Putin's war is the cause of NATO enlargement. We will stand by Ukraine as it fights for its sovereignty and security. We will defend every inch of NATO, and we will continue to strengthen NATO's collective defense and deterrence.
Zašto gotovo nitko ne želi brzi završetak rata u Ukrajini, koji bi počeo mirovnim pregovorima? Zašto su sve oči uprte u oružje, a ne prema miru? Jedan od mogućih odgovora je da svaki rat izvor enormne zarade i stjecanja moći od strane pojedinaca koji upravljaju velikim korporacijama. Možemo reći da je rusko-ukrajinski rat ostvarenje sna vlasnika vojne industrije. Ukrajina i BlackRock su ugovorili obnovu Ukrajine nakon rata. S obzirom da je BlackRock vlasnik i vojne industrije, a biti će vlasnik i industrije obnove. Što duže traje rat i veća su razaranja, to je veća zarada i tijekom rata i još veća nakon rata. I oružje, i rat, i obnovu plaćaju građani Europske unije i građani Hrvatske. Sve do zadnjeg centa izvući će se iz naših džepova putem postojećih poreza, novih poreza i drastičnog povećanja cijena svih roba i usluga. Ne postoji plaćanje od strane vlada pojedinih država, jer vlade nemaju svoj novac, već isključivo raspolažu novcem građana bez da nas išta o tome pitaju i da nam za to raspolaganje odgovore.
Our NATO allies are not just spending more on their own defense, they're also spending more on America's defense industrial base. That means platforms and munitions built in America. And that's helping to revitalize production lines across our country and to create good jobs for American workers.
When I was in the military, I actually worked for a subcommand of NATO. And to see what NATO is now, which is a very aggressive military organization that has gotten the former Soviet Union countries as a part of it in direct contradiction to what the U.S. government told the Soviet Union government back in the 1990s.
The meeting comes amid heightening tensions with Russia. NATO Secretary General recently announced Georgia will be joining the alliance. The West promised the Soviet Union it wouldn't expand 1 inch eastward in the 90s.
What exactly is wrong with the expansion of NATO? These countries want to join NATO. Like Georgia wants to join NATO. They say they feel safer with NATO protection. What's so wrong about that?
And the Russian government says they feel much less safe with a U.S.-led military force on their border. NATO has already expanded to the border of Russia, heightening the danger of a clash between two nuclear nations far beyond what was seen in the previous Cold War.
And Trump says he wants to add Brazil and perhaps Colombia to NATO. What's your response to that?
Well, Colombia is already a so-called global partner in NATO. And Brazil, now there's some discussion around that possibility also. But again, that reveals the true nature of NATO. If NATO was supposed to be concerned about the North Atlantic area, why is it expanding into South America? The answer is because NATO is an instrument of U.S. and Western imperialism. And that's the understanding we're trying to bring to people today.
Well, thank God there's not been actual military conflict between NATO and Russia. We don't want that. But when you look at the very aggressive, offensive exercises that are going on now in all the Baltic countries, now NATO and the U.S. has a military base in Poland. So there's a big buildup of NATO forces along the Russian border, and that's what the Russians are so concerned about. And we certainly hope that the Russians will not respond to NATO's aggression, and that's why we're trying here to get NATO to stop its aggressive activities toward Russia.
Some emphasized the lack of investment in jobs and education compared to growing military spending.
And here today, obviously, to stand up, particularly as we get close to the anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King assassination, we are reminded of the issues that he taught us about in terms of poverty, racism, and militarism. Right? Those are the three evils that he cited as being the things that were holding back human progress. And really, when we talk about NATO and peace, you're talking about a concerted efforts of military in order to check democracies and check emerging movements and to basically suppress them. And so that's what we're out here today saying, that we need to preserve peace, and peace really necessitates a demilitarization.
I'm here today because I thought it was important at an anti-war rally to talk about another occupied group of people, which is poor people across the United States. We are being gentrified out of our neighborhoods. We suffer when money is spent on war because money is not spent on our schools, it's not spent on education, it's not spent on the basic necessities of life. More people have died now from the opiate crisis in our country than died from the Vietnam War.
When the debates come down around education, for example, there's always the question of how can we pay for it, or the issue comes down around affordable housing, or subsidized housing, or public housing. The issue is that nobody really has a passion towards it in terms of the political structure. But if you talk about a military base being built, or you talk about the perfection and the creation of a new weapon, nobody ever debates that because it's a foregone conclusion that can be afforded where other stuff cannot.
What would be the equivalent of what the West is doing to Russia's border? What would be? Could you give me like an equivalent to like something happening to the U.S. just to like kind of give people just to put it in perspective?
Sure, that's kind of like the Russians or the Chinese saying to Canada and Mexico, "Hey, come over and join us because our little coalition will help defend you against the aggressions of the United States." And I think that's the closest analogy there is, or all the Central American countries forming an alliance against the United States, sponsored by like Russia or China. And we wouldn't want that, just like the Russians don't want the alliance that's formed against them.
Events are planned all week in Washington to oppose NATO. For The Real News, this is Jessel Noor reporting from Washington, D.C.
These are scenes of protests playing out in parts of Europe. Protests against NATO and the European Union. France, Germany, and many other countries out on the streets as they grapple with the cost of living crisis. The protests come amid a strike by union workers at France's petroleum refineries. A massive crowd of protesters marched through the center of Paris demanding that France radically changes its stance on NATO and the European Union. Ever since the Ukrainian crisis began, causing a severe energy crisis across Europe, anti-NATO sentiments have been rising among the Europeans. In France, petrol pumps have been running dry as workers' strike continues in the refineries of the major French oil companies. The strike staged by France's CGT union at refineries of ExxonMobil and Total Energies was originally intended to last 3 days, but it has now entered its 13th day. The workers who have staged a strike are demanding for a pay increase against a backdrop of a cost of living crisis and soaring profits in the energy industry. French President Emmanuel Macron has said, "Let's not panic," as he called for calm on all sides. Yet even as the president appealed for an end to the strikes, he agreed that executives at Total Energies should take into account the legitimate salary demands of its workers. Similar scenes occurred in countries such as Germany, where people shouting out "Leave NATO" or "Our country first" hinted at a deeper crisis that Europe is now facing. People in European countries such as Czech, France, and Germany already protested in September over rising living costs. While the protests currently reflect social problems, people are more concerned than ever.
Not a single youth for imperialist war.
Affiliated or Justice Committees affiliated with the international.
NATO members have been responsible for the devastation of Syria, of Iraq, of so many different countries that have been facing war and occupation in the last 20 so years. So NATO has proven time and time again to be a force of war and destruction. The United States is a huge force in this world and not a force for peace, is a force for war. We have the last many years to look at around the world where there is country after country in every region of the world that has faced wars, occupations, coups, military interventions, sanctions at the hand of the United States. The United States can be implicated and it looks like responsible for blowing up a pipeline, for causing environmental destruction, for causing the lack of energy resources for countries in Europe, and not be held accountable. So that's another very concerning and very dangerous element to this war.
The government of Canada is spending billions of dollars to arm Ukraine, but also to meet its requirement of being a NATO member. All those billions of dollars are needed at home, are needed for education. That's why our signs are money for education, not for war. Money for healthcare, not for war. We think positions like the one of China with calling for peace dialogue, calling for more humanitarian aid is something important. The solution to end this war is negotiation, is sitting down, is peace talks. It is not sending more wars, more arms and fueling the war. Loans. This country needs to be spending that money.
I think that NATO is an organization for peace. NATO has been making wars without any NATO countries have been attacked militarily. But still they have destroyed a large part of the Middle East and Afghanistan and so forth. And they have, they go out their own jurisdiction to fight other countries. And it causes a lot of problems in the world. We don't want to be an enemy with Russia. We believe in dialogue and try to, make agreements and so forth. We want to stay neutral and alliance, with no alliance.
I think it's a good opportunity to show that there's a lot of people, especially youth, that are against this because we are the generation that's going to be most affected by this.
Porque Pues tenemos demasiados motivos para estar en contra de la OTAN. No justamente a los imperialismos que lo único que buscan es la desgracia de los pueblos, que lo único que buscan es la guerra. Y lo hemos visto, la OTAN, su leitmotiv es la guerra. Su leitmotiv, su deber existencial no es la defensa, sino es el imperialismo, es la ocupación, como hemos visto demasiadas veces. Y nosotros, como pueblo, no queremos estar dentro de la OTAN, pero tampoco dentro de ningún organismo internacional que busque y viva de la muerte, que viva de la guerra. Los aumentos del gasto militar. La OTAN acordó en 2014, en la conferencia de Glasgow, un aumento del 2% del Producto Interior Bruto. Ahora mismo gastamos un 1%. O sea, tenemos que doblar el gasto militar. ¿De dónde vamos a sacar ese dinero? ¿De la sanidad? ¿De las pensiones? ¿De la educación? ¿Dinero en armas para qué? Justamente para las empresas de la muerte, justamente para satisfacer las demandas de la OTAN. Eso significa estar hoy en día en la OTAN, remilitarizarse. La Unión Europea ha aprobado el mayor gasto militar desde la Segunda Guerra Mundial.
Bueno, yo creo que la OTAN es una de las estructuras armadas más importantes del mundo. En este sentido representa cerca de más del 50% del gasto militar del conjunto del globo. Y representa también el brazo armado de unas determinadas estructuras económicas, industriales y determinadas estructuras políticas dentro de nuestro mundo. Y en este sentido, yo creo que no podemos decir que nuestro mundo esté funcionando bien. Nuestro mundo está funcionando de tal manera que se están generando enormes conflictos militares, enormes hambrunas, situaciones de desigualdad, de falta de derechos, etcétera. Y quien justifica o quien, digamos, sostiene ese mundo es esta estructura militar que ha representado la columna vertebral tanto del imperialismo estadounidense como de la industria armamentística internacional. Nos afecta directamente de muchas maneras. En primer lugar, hemos de tener presente que nuestra estructura militar también está colonizada por la propia OTAN. Es decir, Europa no tiene en estos momentos una defensa autónoma, sino una defensa que depende en muchos aspectos de la propia estructura de la OTAN, digamos, tanto en la formación de los militares como en la homologación de los equipos militares, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Tenemos una situación de dependencia que nos ha metido, entre otras cosas, en una guerra como la de Ucrania, en la que no teníamos por qué estar metidos hasta el tuétano, como lo estamos actualmente, y que va a tener sus consecuencias, tanto desde el punto de vista económico, energético, etcétera.
Nos están vendiendo un concepto de seguridad y de paz que nosotros no compramos. Esto no es la seguridad ni la paz que queremos.
Hombre, en principio yo estoy en contra de la OTAN, porque la OTAN es el brazo armado del capitalismo.
Bueno, yo estoy aquí porque creo que hay que manifestarse en contra de la carrera armamentística que se está desarrollando, pues no solamente en Europa, sino a nivel internacional a través de la OTAN. Entonces parece que Estados Unidos es el que marca las directrices y nosotros le seguimos fielmente. Pero esto no deja de ser un negocio increíble en el mundo del armamento. O sea, son grandes beneficios y con unos costes sociales muy importantes, no solo sociales, sino en vidas humanas y la carestía y, en fin, que yo veo que los programas de armamento no sirven prácticamente nada más que a los intereses de unos cuantos, no beneficia en general a la sociedad.
Porque estoy en contra de la OTAN, porque estoy en contra de las guerras. Las guerras no nos solucionan nada, destruyen, destrozan, nos rompen las infraestructuras, matan a las personas y solo sirven para el negocio y para la rapiña de un grupo de personas, oligarcas, llámalo como quieras, que se van a beneficiar de esos territorios, de esos espacios, de esas riquezas. Las guerras destrozan los pueblos y la OTAN se sirve de eso para el negocio, para seguir depredando y enriqueciéndose un grupo de personas, de empresarios, de poderes fácticos que no nos ayudan, solo nos dañan, solo provocan más daño, más destrucción.
Oggi, andiamo a San Carlo, si celebrano i 75 anni dell'Alleanza Atlantica, 75 anni di guerre, 75 anni contro l'autodeterminazione dei popoli, 75 anni di usurpazione dell'autodeterminazione dei popoli. È questa la reazione del dispositivo di sicurezza di un paese democratico! È questa la reazione! Vergogna!
Vamos, yo estoy en contra de la cumbre por una cuestión de principios, ¿no? Y la cumbre me parece que es la reunión de los peores del mundo y para lo peor del mundo, ¿no? Porque es para gastar más dinero en armamento y para ser más agresivo contra países pobres.
Harta de que solo haya un negocio que es las armas y matar a la gente. Y la solución a los problemas son armas y guerras. Y siempre pagamos los mismos, Y por eso, por OTAN no, bases fuera, que los americanos se vayan a sus Américas y que nos dejen tranquilos de guerras y de armas.
Porque va a haber una cumbre de la OTAN el próximo miércoles y jueves y creemos que la OTAN es una organización criminal que no debería estar planteándose como la única alternativa a una guerra que está consumiendo Europa.
Antiimperialistas, ya, anticapitalistas. Vamos a contar mentiras, vamos a contar. No a la guerra.
Every evening in the media, you can see agitation against Russia, which is starting to become unbearable. Russia has been assured in various treaties that NATO will not further pursue its eastward expansion, and there is an urgent need for those treaties to be upheld.
The Security Conference is an insecurity conference because it agitates, and agitation against other countries is not allowed.
Wir wissen aus vielen Umfragen in Deutschland aus den letzten Monaten, dass die Mehrheit der Bevölkerung wünscht, dass dieser Krieg beendet wird und dass man sich darum wünscht, dass endlich verhandelt wird und nicht immer mehr Waffen geliefert werden.
With tanks and all the weapons from the west side doesn't make a difference. It is putting gas in the fire. When you support a war with weapons, you are on the wrong side.
midst of another economic crisis, we know that by coming here today, they say we need to fight them over there before they kill millions more over there. Can you dig it?
Nicaragua, Palestine, Iraq, Sudan, Yemen.
We will. The difference between our government these days, and for me, it was really my part in the whole in the Ron Paul revolution.
Military aid is not helping anything, and it's become a proxy war. The United States basically has economic interests, and they see Europe as a big prize, but Ukraine as a stepping stone.
I think the best thing to do is to always talk.
I feel like NATO has been a force for destruction and aggression.